Good evening. It's a great pleasure to be opening our season, our 95th season, with a run of 6 exceptional concerts for the month of October. I hope we're living up to our track record for the best of the best in quite a few genres. Tonight, we present Fretwork, which has been called the finest viol concert on the planet, with the extraordinary countertenor Yeston Davis, truly superb artists. I'm Anne McLean from the library's concert office, and with me is Fretwork founder Richard Boothby, also a founder of the Purcell Quartet, an equally pace-setting ensemble. Welcome, Richard, and I'm thrilled to have you demonstrate our Pieter Rombouts viol from 1708.
I thought I'd play a short piece by Carl Friedrich Abel, who was the last great virtuoso of the viol, and he lived in London for the last 20, 30 years of his life. And this is part of a collection which is actually housed in New York, which may have been a collection of pieces written down for his friend Thomas Gainsborough, the celebrated portraitist of the time. And it goes like this. I chose the piece because Abel was a German musician, German viol player. He came from a family of viol players who were friendly with Bach and the Bach family through several generations. And Abel probably played mostly German instruments. And although Rombouts is a Dutch maker, Dutch and German viols had a lot in common, and very often difficult to distinguish the national styles. The first thing you would notice about an instrument like this, sorry, I'll put that down. First thing you'd notice is what's called a high arching here, that the belly of the instrument is given a very big curve, and you can see that when I hold it sideways like that. If you see that, I mean, just noticing in those cases there, those celebrated Stradivari and Amati and Guarneri instruments, the Italian style was quite different, was to have very, really shallow arching. The high arching tends to give a rather sweeter sound to the instrument, but not so powerful, not so strong a projection. So the Strads and the Amatis have become more and more, how can I say, they're more preferred, because as concert life has got louder and louder, the stronger instrument tends to carry through, whereas the sweeter sounding but weaker sounding instruments from Steiner and the German makers have tended to lose out. However, for viols, it's a slightly different dynamic. We tend not to play concerti and play with orchestras and so on. So power and volume is not really so much of an issue. So it's it's an enormous pleasure to play an original 17th century instrument. The difference between the violins and the viols in this respect is that violins and violas and cellos have been used continuously in great numbers, and viols fell out of fashion during the 19th century a lot, and so a lot of instruments were thrown away. They became disrepaired and were forgotten about. Some of them were converted into cellos, or sometimes the smaller ones converted into violins or something like that. But conversion is generally not very successful, and it tends to ruin both instruments. the viol in the first part, and it doesn't make a particularly good cello. So, but on the other hand, we have had a few instruments survive simply because they have been preserved as cellos. So we've been able to deconstruct or reconstruct them from those instruments. So the number of viols that have survived through to this present day is relatively small by comparison with violins and cellos. I can't remember. Somebody is doing a database, even as we speak, of however many viols there are, but there are hundreds rather than thousands is the result of that.
You know, when you were talking, this was one of the questions I was hoping you'd touch on, is what happened to the viol and why we don't have more of them. And I was looking at this treatise by Hubert Leblanc, and he talks about how he's making a defense of the viola da gamba against the enterprises of the violin and the pretensions of the violoncello. But it's great to hear you to try this. We don't often have it played. We like to have it played more often. And I was going to ask you how you felt when you saw our stuff this afternoon. We took Richard and his colleagues into the basement, which is like a city block's worth of music under the building across the street, a massive archive. And you're not expecting this, and you go into a vault of instruments. So how did you react to that?
Well, it was, of course, does this one work? Yeah. No? Yes, it does. I was expecting to see the Rombouts viol. I wasn't expecting to see there was several violas de More there. There was a Guersin, par-dessus de viol, which is like a treble viol, but even smaller. And what else was there? There was
1,000 or 2,000 flutes.
Well, I didn't see the flutes.
Didn't see the flutes.
But it's true. One doesn't expect to see quite so many instruments stashed away there like that. It's a great thing.
In the dark, sort of, and then of course nowadays the flute vault is much more high tech than it used to be. It's got beautiful cases and it's climate controlled and so on. But it was just very special to take you there. And you guys are really, what you've said, are you're evangelists for this instrument, and Richard himself has been extraordinarily influential in bringing back and revitalizing and so forth for many, many decades. But one of the things, I know your time is limited, one of the things that's so exciting about your concert tonight and about your work is that you are so involved with contemporary music, and that may not be something that we all would expect. But some of the pieces tonight, like the Michael Nyman, this is your doing.
Well, yes. There's. It's not just me. There are other people. But with Fretwork, we started playing contemporary music in about 1990 because it wasn't something that we sought to do. But in that year, George Benjamin heard an album that we'd made and was struck by the sounds and approached. He wrote to me, and I went along and I demonstrated the possibilities on the viol to him at his house. And he went away and, in typical fashion for him, produced many charts of chordal possibilities and all the technical possibilities for the instrument as he saw them. And then wrote this remarkable piece called Upon Silence, which was a say, coup de foudre, as a sort of, it was an astonishing piece, and it took us fully, I think probably about 10 years before we could really play it properly. Many of the things that he came up with were not at all obvious to us. And so and in fact, he was sort of teaching us how to play them. There were many arpeggios, for instance, going across, and we were trying to finger them up and down the instrument like that. And he said, no, I was just imagining you put your finger across the strings like that. And so he was teaching us how to play his piece, on the viol. But it was a remarkable experience, and it opened our eyes to the possibilities of contemporary music, and without actually realizing at the time, it becomes clear that you have to have contemporary music for these instruments in order for them to be relevant, to have a living repertoire. Although great though the repertoire is, which I love, of course, in the 16th and 17th century, it is absolutely limited. It finishes on the 31st of August in 1680 with Purcell's Last Fantasy, and that's it. There is no more music written for viol consort until, I don't know, sometime in the middle of the 1960s, I imagine. So in order to create a living repertory, we need to get composers to write for us.
You're doing a new piece that is so fascinating about the history of the Francis Drake journey with the Golden Hind. Tell them about that a little bit. It's an hour-long piece, right?
Yes, I'd love to. It was, many years ago, a friend of mine put on a concert of music for gamelan and English viol consort music, and said that it was related to Drake's experiences on his circumnavigation of the globe in 1577 to 80. And I sort of thought that was bizarre and extraordinary idea, and then thought more about it. Then a few years ago, it came back to my mind, and I thought that there was something absolutely extraordinary about the encounter between Drake and his musicians and the people living in Java in the 16th century who had presumably never seen or heard any Western music, and vice versa, and that the Western musicians would never have heard any Javanese music. And then I learned that Drake actually took 4 viol players with him on his journey around the world, and that they played for Drake's supper. During his supper, they played when they prayed during the day. There was 15 minutes of hymns, which the viols accompanied, and they played to the native people that they met, and so on. So this, and we even know their names. I can't actually remember them off the top of my head right now, but we actually can tell you who they were.
Were they sailors as well?
Well, I imagine they must have been pretty useful. I can't imagine them just sitting around doing nothing while waiting for the dinner time to arrive. So I sure they did other useful things as well. But anyway, so using that as the idea, we commissioned a composer, Orlando Goff, to imagine what musics these viol players might have come across in this remarkable journey. And he sort of thought to himself about, well, how do I express this music for viols? And so the idea he came up with was, when the viol players got back and all their friends said, well, what was it like? What did you hear? What was the music you heard? And they said, well, it went something like this, and they got their viol out and they started trying to imitate the musics of the places that they visited. Of course, we've got no idea what music, 16th century Far Eastern music was like. We've got absolutely no idea whatsoever. So it's an absolutely imaginative journey for Orlando to make. So we made a patchwork of original 16th century viol music, which they might have played on the journey, and Orlando's imaginings of this different music that
Wonderful.
they encountered. And then we wove into it a narrative taken from the accounts of the journey and several other things like the pilot. They captured a Portuguese pilot in the Cape Verde Islands and took him round with them till they got to Mexico, and then dropped him off in Mexico. And he was questioned by the Inquisition, and that account is survived. So we know what he said about the journey. And
So it's really a theater piece. This is wonderful. Where will it be
Yes,
done?
it's
Or
got-
has it been done yet?
it hasn't been done as a theatre piece, but we've performed it many times and recorded it. And yes, we love playing it. It's a great piece.
And the Nyman pieces that you'll hear tonight, the beautiful songs If and Why,
Yeah.
you've been associated with Nyman for quite a while, and you transcribe, this is one of the many things you've made gorgeous transcriptions of, right?
Yes. Well, Michael wrote us a piece in 1993, which we're doing later on the tour with Yestin. It was originally written for James Bowman and us, and so Michael's music is absolutely, totally different from George Benjamin's music. You couldn't imagine more different music. But it was wonderful to have that variety already, and as an ensemble, we were not having really any contact with contemporary music world at all. We hadn't realised the bitter divisions there were within the world of contemporary music, and how the many sides and the many genres all hate each other with a passion. Being performers, we have to be and are extremely Catholic in our tastes for contemporary music. So we play it all. And but anyway, Michael wrote this piece, and then later on I came across some more of his songs and suggested and asked if I could arrange them, and he said yes. He's extremely unprecious about his music and how it might be arranged. If it works, he's happy, you know. And so I arranged If and Why, and then also a piece called Balancing the Books, which was originally for swingle singers. So wordless vocal music, which suited us very well. So yes.
So this is really a wonderful three-century tour trajectory of music, a lot of which you've been involved with transcribing or refitting, retrofitting, but also including, I love the song Silent Noon, the Ralph Vaughan Williams song. There are two of them, just gorgeous songs, and I can't wait to hear what you do with them, because the palette that these partners come up with is extraordinary. It's gorgeous. And that leads me to a question about the articulation. I read an interesting quote from Yestin about how working with the viols has given him a different sense of singing, how you articulate with viols as opposed to other instruments.
Yes, well, that's very kind of him to say that. I think that viols have a rather vocal way of producing their sounds. And it's difficult to put your finger on exactly what it is. There is a great affinity between the countertenor voice and viols. There's a straightness about not that Yestin or any countertenor is particularly straighter voice than other voices, but they attune to the viols more easily somehow, and it's a question of the amount of vibrato that's used. I mean, because viols use very little vibrato, that's closer to how a countertenor produces its voice as well. But also the sort of shapes that the viols, without having the left-hand vibrato so much, the viols are forced to make more shapes with the bow. And I think that relates to the sort of shapes that a vocalist would use with vowels and so on. So I think I can see there's an affinity there. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it really struck me. I've never found such a quote before, but he talks about emphasis and phrasing for the singer's point of view relates to the performance technique and practicalities of playing the viol. And then he says something that relates to our performance tonight in the Coolidge, because he says it affects the way the singer perceives the sung sound from within and without, his own sung sound. And that is affected by the size and space of the room. So I'm very curious to hear how this sounds in the Coolidge, which is, of course, is so resonant. And I hope you will enjoy it and the space.
We have already, yes.
Good, good. Okay. He said something else that I was going to ask you. Well, I should go back and talk to him. He's an amazingly thoughtful artist, as is Richard. He says a relevant response to ancient music is to give a performance that is timeless. I love that.
Yeah.
This
Yes.
is how you live. This is what you do together and as a
Yes, yes. The time is the time of the composition is both crucial to the how you approach the music performance, and at the same time utterly irrelevant, because the music is now. The music is the sound that you hear, the sound that we make, the sound that you hear. So there's a paradox there between those two things, and I mean, the historical approach of trying to get closer to original sound conceptions of composers is merely a way of exciting the imagination in a way about how music might be performed. As soon as it becomes rigid and inflexible, then it needs to be thrown out because it will stop imaginative performance. I think that's the.
Have you recorded besides the Nyman? What have you recorded with him or anything?
Well, we did the album with him last year with Nyman and Purcell. That's that was the content of it. We've got another disc planned next year or the year after. Next year I think it is. I'm not sure what we're going to put on it yet, but we definitely want to carry on working with him. He really is an exceptional singer and a joy to work with.
Tonight we have in our cases a Handel opera, one of the Handel operas that he's singing that's open. We have several Handel original manuscripts that are nice to see if you have a moment to take a look at them. And I know that from in the Giulio Cesare there is a gamba part that's written out, I understand, from 1724. So there were still, at that point, people were very much writing for them.
Oh yes, yes. Well, absolutely. Handel's wrote a handful of pieces for the viol. This short aria in Giulio Cesare. There's a cantata called Tra le Fiamme, which was written in Rome for the great virtuoso Hesse, who was visiting Rome at the time. And at the same time, Handel wrote the viol part for La Resurrezione, which is also got a very big and virtuosic part for him. And the interesting feature about all those works is that Handel wants the viol to be the continuo player, that the viol part has figures in it, and he expected the part to be played as so in Tra le Fiamme, for example, he starts off with the first bar and a half or 2 bars fully written out chords, and then just the bass line with figures underneath. So he expects the viol player to carry on playing chords throughout, and so that's very much how Handel approached the viol in that respect.
And for you, I know you have a lot of solo projects and solo recordings, and the Jenkins CD that you made is stunning. I just wondered what projects you have on your own in mind. Just for your own, yeah, or just on your own.
Oh, myself? Yeah. Well, yes, I'm going to be.
In your spare time.
In my spare time, I'm going to be recording an album of the. I played some arble there. The whole tranche of sonatas has just been discovered in a castle in Poland that were that were virtuosic sonatas for viol and continuo, and which we haven't got any of at all by Abel so far. They were discovered in the castle in Poland. An interesting story, because the castle had been owned by the Prussian ambassador to London, who was a viol player, and he lived in London during Abel's lifetime. Was recalled to Prussia before Abel's death, and then reappeared in London for the year of Abel's death, when his effects were sold by his brother. And it's highly likely that this man came back to buy the sonatas at auction, and there they resided until I don't know, about 5 or 6 years ago. Somebody discovered them and published them, and
Serendipity.
yeah, it's wonderful.
Well, I know your time is very limited. Are there just one or two questions you might have for Richard now before he has to warm up?
What was the piece that you played?
That just then? Yeah. That was by Abel. It doesn't really have a title, but it comes from this collection of probably written down improvisations, and Abel was famous for his improvisations. And my contention is that he wouldn't have written down his improvisation, because he had no need to. He just made them up as he went along. So I think he wrote them down for Gainsborough, his friend, who was an excellent viol player, a really, really fine viol player, and sometimes mistaken for Abel when people heard him play without knowing who was playing. So he was really a fine player.
Anyone else? Any viol player kinds of questions? No? Do you have one?
Is it harder to tune the viol than other early string instruments? I remember a concert we were in Hall where the viols seemed to take a very long time to tune.
Yes. Well, yes, it can take a long time. Yeah, it does. I mean, I mean, so for the most part, you have gut strings, and gut strings are more susceptible to atmospheric change. Not so much temperature as humidity. So today it's been very wet here, and yesterday was quite dry. So all our instruments were getting, the bass were going sharp and the treble were going flat all the time, while as they absorbed the moisture in the air. And now people tell me the skies are cleared, so the moisture will disappear out, and then the exact opposite will happen. And which is, you know, that's what we have to put up with. That's what we're used to. Yeah. So I mean, but I think you can do it quickly, and. It's always a play-off between tuning absolutely perfectly and realizing that you need to get on with it because people are waiting to hear you play. So,
For the contemporary pieces that you mentioned, you use a dramatically different technique to play those, or the expectation from the composer that you're using a historical technique on those instruments?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, well, I mean, usually contemporary composers have little knowledge of or interest in historical performance practices. What they're looking for with the viol is a particular sound, and they come to us with technical demands which enhance our technique of playing in that sense. So there is a sort of there's a negotiation going on between the way we play. I mean, obviously the way we play contemporary music is quite different from the way modern string players would play contemporary music, and so that they get something of the historical attitude towards string music, but then we get a lot of demands, like, you know, like just normal things that you would expect in music: forte, piano, crescendo, accents, all that sort of thing, which we're not terribly good at doing, I have to say. It's quite hard to get used to following those kind of instructions when you're used to doing what you like, really.
Maybe one more? Anyone else? No? Well, thank you so much. Oh, yeah, one more? Okay, yeah.
Did you say the instrument or the oboe score was from New York? Could you comment about sets of viol instruments? Are any of your 5 instruments related? And how long did European aristocrats, continue to hold on to matched sets of viol instruments?
You mean what are they called, chests of vials?
Chests of viol, yeah.
Yeah, well, of course, certainly in the 16th and 17th centuries, vials were often made as a set. So you get instruments made by the same maker to sit together and to play together in that sense. But I don't really know of that hasn't survived. I mean, because so few vials have survived, no complete set. And I mean, it would be difficult to identify them as a set now, these days, so we don't know. The last real evidence we have for people talking about sets of vials was the chap called Thomas Mace in 1670. He talked about how you would have 6 vials, 2 trebles, 2 tenors, 2 basses, and then you'd have another 3 lira vials, and you might have a theorbo, and it all sounded terribly expensive to me, frankly. So I think they talked about it then. But of course, consort music fell out of fashion around then, about sort of the 1670s, and people stopped playing tenor and treble vials at that time. And you see makers like Barrack Norman and Lewis and other people from the late 17th, early 18th centuries, they don't make treble and tenor vials. They're only making bass vials. So the aristocratic usage of a set of vials really ended in probably more like the middle of the 17th century. But interestingly, the vials held on during the 19th century, mostly through painters, through visual artists who were as much interested in the shape and the iconography of the instrument as they were in the music for it. Well, they weren't actually interested in the music for it at all. They were just interested in it as a historical thing, an object that excited, because of course there were plenty of paintings of vials. It had a similar status to the lute, as something that said oldness, said ancient. So you see these rather ridiculous paintings, ridiculous depictions of vial-like objects in the pre-Raphaelite paintings. Couldn't possibly work kind of instruments, but they had something of the shape and the iconography.
They looked good.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, this is so great to be able to chat with you about this. I wish that you didn't have to warm up and get ready, but he's asked for a little extra time, so thank you so much.